Kashmir is no stranger to global headlines. In the past, it was for all the wrong reasons: terror attacks, proxy wars, internet shutdowns. But not anymore. Today, the world is not talking about Kashmir, they're talking in Kashmir. A key G20 meeting is underway in Srinagar. It's a working group on tourism. Around 60 foreign delegates are in attendance. They will spend the next 3 days here. At the Kashmir International Convention Centre, it's a big moment for Kashmir. This is the Valley's first mega event since 2019. That's when statehood was revoked, when Kashmir's special powers were taken away. But since then, there's been massive progress. This G20 meeting is a prime example of that. The days of militancy and instability seem to be over. It's now time for change. Having said that, all precautions are in place. Marine and energy commandos have been deployed, anti-drone technology is in place, and the CRPF are conducting mock drills. If things are fine, then why all the security, you may ask? Because New Delhi can only count on Kashmir and its people. Across the border, it's a different story altogether. We've seen 2 attempts to derail this meeting. One was a terror plot. The second was Islamist propaganda. Let's deal with the first one first. Reports say Pakistani terrorists were planning a major attack, perhaps like 26/11 in Mumbai. Their target was Gulmarg. G20 delegates were expected to visit the ski town later this week. It was part of their 3-day itinerary. But now the Gulmarg leg has been dropped. According to reports, the plan was this: terrorists would attack the hotel where the delegates were staying, hold them hostage and create bad headlines for Kashmir and set back the gains of 2019. So what did the local administration do? They dropped Gulmarg from the plan. Instead, Srinagar will host all the events. It tells you what the challenges are on the ground. Pakistan doesn't want peace in the valley, which brings us to their second strategy: to use the Islamist agenda to keep Muslim countries away. Pakistan made an open appeal to OIC nations. OIC is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Islamabad asked these countries to boycott the Kashmir meeting, and did they? Well, reports say Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Egypt did not send delegations. They did not have official representation, but their private sector did. Now, this is important to note. Countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey have immense control over their private sector. Would they have come without the state's blessing? Highly unlikely. Either way, the Indian government is not reading too much into it. They're calling the Kashmir meeting a grand success. Listen in to G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant.
We view tourism as both a public and a private sector activities. All countries except China are participating here. Let me say that the tourism working group meeting in Kashmir has had an overwhelming response. Normally in any meeting anywhere, 4 to 5 countries do not come for various reasons because they are invited countries also. So it's not that some country is not coming here doesn't mean that he's become an enemy of ours. Don't take it to that level.
So to sum up, here's what happened. Pakistan tried hard to derail this summit, first by plotting terror attacks and then by appealing to Muslim countries, but both plans flopped. Bangladesh sent representatives to Kashmir. So did Nigeria, Indonesia and the UAE. All 4 are Muslim countries. They're also all members of the OIC. These countries saw and understood what Pakistan and China could not. That Kashmir has changed. That Kashmiris themselves won this summit. In fact, I have some numbers for you. Last year, 18 million people, 18 million tourists visited Jammu and Kashmir. That's the highest ever. Kashmir also got its first foreign investment. Dubai's Emaar Group is investing $60 million. They're building a shopping complex in Srinagar. How was all of this possible? Because Kashmir's security situation has improved. There were more than 400 terror attacks in 2018. By 2021, it was less than 250. And all of this shows one thing: Kashmir is on the path to peace and prosperity. The G20 meeting is meant to celebrate that, to highlight how safe and exciting Kashmir has become. It's not some bullet point on the OIC's agenda, nor is it the Pakistani deep state's playground anymore. Today's Kashmir wants to host global events, not to become the topic at global events. It's been a busy weekend in the world of diplomacy. The G7 summit took place in Hiroshima. They had a last-minute guest, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Quad leaders met in Japan. Their summit in Australia was cancelled because Biden had to rush back home. He's navigating a debt ceiling crisis. Then Italy's Prime Minister had to cut short her trip too. Her country has been hit by floods. She returned, but not before telling the Canadian Prime Minister to stop mansplaining. That's a story for another day. Tonight, let me tell you about one leader who's been making strides, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He's on a three-nation tour and halfway through it. Today, he was in Papua New Guinea. It's a tiny Pacific island that's now making international headlines. Modi's visit began on a unique note. Let me show you what it looked like. That's James Marape, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea. He's touching the feet of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In Indian culture, you would know, this is a way to show respect to your elders, a way to seek their blessings. But it's not something you see heads of state do in public. So this was a special gesture. And today, Prime Minister Marape showered praises on the Indian Prime Minister. Let me quote from what he said. "We are victims of global power play. You, Prime Minister Modi, are the leader of the global South. We will rally behind your, that is India's leadership at global forums. These nations sitting before you, Mr. Prime Minister, have high costs of fuel and power tariffs in their own countries, and we suffer as a result of big nations at play in terms of geopolitics and the power struggles out there."
We are victims of global power play. We want you to be an advocate for us as you sit in those meetings and continue to fight for the rights of small emerging nations and emerging economies.
It was a passionate appeal. Prime Minister Marape was speaking on behalf of this region, the Pacific. It has 14 island nations. Their leaders were all present in today's meeting with the Indian Prime Minister. They're participating in the Forum for India-Pacific Island Cooperation. Their first meeting happened in 2014, the second one in 2015, and then nothing for almost 8 years. Other priorities took over. You could call it policy neglect. What happened today was their third meeting. Why now? Because the world is changing and the world order is changing. The Pacific wants India's attention and support. As Prime Minister Marape put it, they're victims of global power play, of the Cold War between America and China. Both want to control the Pacific Islands. Both want greater access to these waters. They're expanding their military presence and pushing for more influence, and the Pacific nations are too small to push back. They are being forced to choose between the US and China, and they're hoping that India can come to their rescue as the anchor of stability. Hence the effort to woo Prime Minister Modi. Through gestures, through speeches, and through awards, he's been conferred with top honors today. He's been given the highest civilian awards of Papua New Guinea and Fiji. Prime Minister Modi has been awarded for championing Pacific Island unity and for spearheading the cause of the global South. In response, Mr. Modi said, the Pacific can count on India.
आपका डेवलपमेंट पार्टनर होने पर गर्व महसूस करता है। मानवीय सहायता हो या फिर आपका विकास, भारत को आप भरोसेमंद पार्टनर के रूप में देख सकते हैं, विश्वास कर सकते हैं।
So that was the Prime Minister's message. But what's in it for India? Well, lots. Number one, a way to counter China and its expansionist agenda in the region. Number two, access to new trade links. Number three, access to vast ocean resources of the Pacific like nickel, lithium and cobalt. Number four, partnership on common goals like sustainable development, climate change, food and energy security. So there's a lot of scope for convergence. New Delhi will have to overcome the tyranny of distance to make the most of it. They've identified key areas of cooperation like clean energy, technology, solar electrification, and India can leave an immediate impact in these areas. The trick is to keep at it, to not let other seemingly more urgent issues to take over, like it happened in the case of America. President Biden was also supposed to be in Papua New Guinea today, the first presidential visit in decades, but he cancelled it. In his place, Secretary of State Blinken has arrived. He signed a military pact with Papua New Guinea. With this, America will expand military access in the region, and US personnel and contractors may get legal immunity to freely operate here. In return, the island will get US military supplies like ballistic helmets, flak jackets, and armor plates, among other things. The US will pay for all of this. Reports say it will cost America barely $45 million. It's nothing for them. China, too, has been signing deals in the region, promising to spend on development and security in return for access. And that's exactly what Prime Minister Marape was referring to. These countries need monetary and security assistance. The Pacific Islands, they need it. But when it comes from the big powers, it also means compromising with their sovereignty. But that's not the case with India. New Delhi forges partnerships. That's what Pacific Islands hope to get with Prime Minister Modi's visit. From G20 to the G7, Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended the summit. He joined the G7 talks. He took part in the Quad meeting. He also had multiple bilaterals, but one engagement stood out: his meeting with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. It was a complete surprise. Neither side had announced the meeting, but by Friday evening, news trickled in. Prime Minister Modi would meet the Ukrainian president. It was their second meeting, first since the war broke out. Prime Minister Modi promised to do everything he can to help Ukraine. Listen to this.
मैं आपको विश्वास दिलाता हूं कि इसके समाधान के लिए भारत और निजी रूप से मैं स्वयं हमसे जो कुछ भी हो सकता है हम अवश्य करेंगे। यूक्रेन में चल रहा युद्ध पूरे विश्व के लिए बहुत बड़ा मुद्दा है। पूरे विश्व पर इसके अनेक प्रकार के प्रभाव भी पड़े हैं, लेकिन मैं इसे राजनीति या अर्थव्यवस्था का मुद्दा नहीं मानता। मेरे लिए यह मानवता का मुद्दा है, मानवीय मूल्यों का मुद्दा है।
Couple of things to note here. Number one, Prime Minister Modi did not mislabel the situation. He called it a yuddh, which means war. Number two, it shows how strong India's position is. New Delhi has refused to condemn Russia's war, yet the G7 keeps inviting India. New Delhi decides to meet Zelensky face to face, yet there is no blowback from Russia. This is what strategic autonomy means. Western media and commentators should take note. They keep clubbing India and China together, but in reality, the policies are very different. For China, this is an opportunity, a chance to undermine the West. That's not the case with India. New Delhi's neutrality is not about hurting or undermining anyone. It's about protecting its own interests. And those are two very different goals. While Zelensky dominated G7 proceedings, the leaders did get some work done. Three things stand out. Number one, the plan to combat economic coercion. It doesn't mention China, but every single provision is aimed at Beijing. The idea is to challenge China's economic might. How? By using alternate supply chains, by imposing multilateral export controls, and by partnering with emerging economies. The US already does this, but now Europe and Japan are also joining. They're creating a separate body to implement this plan. Number two, the nuclear declaration. Remember, this summit was being held in Hiroshima. So the theme of nuclear weapons was prominent. The G7 leaders agreed on reducing nukes. They also committed to the ultimate goal of eliminating all nuclear weapons. It sounds impossible, I know, but the idea is to also send a message to Putin that nuclear weapons is the red line. And finally, number three, more support for Ukraine. G7 leaders promised to fund Kiev's defense and reconstruction. They also hinted at more sanctions on Russia. Looking back, how will this summit be remembered? Most probably for Zelensky's visit. The symbolism of wartime leader visiting Hiroshima is huge. It was a big headline everywhere. Maybe that's why China is acting out, because nobody is really talking about them. Beijing has accused the G7 of smearing and attacking them. They even summoned the Japanese ambassador. The question is why? Well, what else was China expecting from the G7? Their joint statement calls out China on many fronts. The use of force in the South China Sea, the situation near Taiwan, and the human rights crackdown in Tibet and Xinjiang. It was explicit criticism. Let me, in fact, give you an example. There is no legal basis for China's expansive maritime claims in the South China Sea, and we oppose China's militarization activities in the region. UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak went one step ahead. He called China the biggest threat to the current global order. Listen to this.
First of all, just recognizing the systemic challenge that China poses to the world order. I think it's the only country with both the means and intent to reshape the world order. Its behavior is increasingly authoritarian at home and assertive abroad.
China has criticized that statement too, and their fear is understandable. Beijing's entire strategy is based on two moves: to dominate the global supply chains, to make itself indispensable to other countries, and to divide the Western world, to ensure there is no consensus on policy. But looks like the G7 has realized this strategy, And they've roped in emerging economies to diversify supply chains. They've also unveiled united policy on economic coercion. On paper, these are all welcome moves. But as always, implementation will be key. So that's the diplomatic news. But what's happening on the battlefield? Well, Ukraine is all set to receive a new weapon, the F-16 fighter jet. Zelensky has been asking for a long time, but NATO was reluctant. They thought a fighter jet would be a big escalation. Not anymore, I guess. Last week, two NATO nations proposed the idea, Britain and the Netherlands. They proposed to create an international coalition to procure the jets and train the pilots. Just one problem, though. You can't randomly sell F-16s. They're American planes. For a third-party sale, you need the permission of the U.S. government. On Friday, Joe Biden gave it. He agreed to back the international fighter jet coalition. Listen in.
You know, in my private meeting with President Zelensky after the G7 meeting and with his staff, I told him the United States, together with our allies and partners, is going to begin training Ukrainian pilots in fourth-generation fighter aircraft, including F-16s. I have a flat assurance from Zelensky that they will not use it to go on and move into Russian geographic territory.
Some background first. The F-16 is a fighter jet made by Lockheed Martin. It was first flown in 1979. Today it's everywhere. There are more than 2,200 active F-16s in the world, 2,200. That's 15% of the global fleet. The U.S. Air Force calls it low cost but high performance. It's a multi-role jet. You can use it for air-to-air combat and ground attacks. The F-16s were used in the 1991 Gulf War. They've also flown in Afghanistan, Kosovo, and the Persian Gulf, sort of like a workhorse. Ukraine has asked for 200 such jets. The question is, where will they come from? Giving new jets is out of the question, so NATO countries will have to dip into their arsenal. Around 25 countries use the F-16s. These include Poland, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Denmark. Any of these countries could provide the jets. Zelensky believes the F-16 will change the momentum, perhaps turn the tide in Ukraine's favor. Well, it's certainly possible. Weapons have indeed won wars before. The Stinger missile won the Soviet-Afghan war. It had a 79% success rate. The F-14 Tomcat turned the tide during the Iran-Iraq war. Iran says they shot down 160 jets with their Tomcats. And how many did they lose? Just 16. So weapons can become a game changer. But will the F-16 do the same in Ukraine? Well, there are multiple challenges. The first is training. Ukraine has always used old Soviet planes. Their pilots will have to be trained on the F-16, and that could take many months. Plus the maintenance. The F-16 requires a lot of it. Around 16 hours of maintenance per 1 hour flown. Does Ukraine have that sort of skill or time? If they don't, do they at least have the time to learn it? That's one big question. The second is storing them. F-16 jets require long and well-maintained runways. Reports say Ukraine doesn't really have them. Their runways are more suited to Soviet-era jets. But these are all technical problems. There's an even bigger political problem. How will Russia see this move? Moscow is already threatening NATO. They're calling this F-16 plan a colossal risk for the West. And they're not wrong. We've seen a gradual rise in lethal weaponry for Ukraine. It's not just guns and tanks anymore. We're talking about cutting-edge weapons. First, you had the HIMARS, a rocket that could reach Russian territory. Its range was around 300 kilometers. Then the Storm Shadow missiles, again long range, and now the F-16s. Do you see the trajectory? In February 2022, Ukraine had virtually no capacity to hit deep inside Russia. Now they have multiple options. NATO says Ukraine will not use the long range. You just heard Joe Biden. He says the F-16s will not be used to strike Russian territory. But remember, this is war. Fighter jets are not pets you can leash. Once the fighting breaks out, anything is possible. So why is NATO taking that risk? Is it because Ukraine's defense is faltering? Or is it because they believe Russia is vulnerable? Right now, it's hard to say. There are multiple versions to every story. Just look at what's happening in Bakhmut. It's a town in eastern Ukraine. It's also the longest battle in this war. The Russian assault began sometime in the month of August last year. Russia says the battle is over, that Wagner mercenaries took the city of Bakhmut and they will transfer it to the Russian army. But Zelensky says that's not true.
Today, the Ukrainian forces fulfill a very important task. They are in Bakhmut today. Where exactly, I am not going to tell you. But this means that Bakhmut has not been conquered by the Russian Federation today. There can be no other interpretation.
Is Zelensky saying that to appease his Western allies? Or has Bakhmut really fallen? Most of the city was controlled by Russian fighters, so a Russian victory is certainly possible. But once again, Bakhmut shows how confusing the situation really is. Remember all those Wagner threats and tantrums. Days later, those same people are claiming victory. Was that also propaganda? It's impossible to say, really. But here's one thing we do know. Russia is a nuclear state ruled by a defiant leader. If the tide turns in Ukraine's favor, what do you think Putin will do? Sign a peace deal or unleash the Russian war machine? That's the risk with these F-16 jets and long-range missiles. The chip war is a fight to control the future. The US wants to deny China the upper hand, but Washington is losing ground to Beijing in another battleground. That's currency. Countries across the world are ditching the US dollar. Tonight, we want to tell you about how it's playing out in West Asia. Iraq has become the latest country to dump the US dollar. Iraqis are now banned from dealing in the greenback. The announcement was made last week. Iraq's Interior Ministry issued a statement. It was a message for all citizens of Iraq. Listen to this. The dinar is the national currency in Iraq. Your commitment to transact in it instead of foreign currencies boosts the country's sovereignty and economy. So currency has now become a matter of nationalism. But why were Iraqis relying on the dollar in the first place? Well, this is a trend that dates back to the 1990s. It began with the Gulf War in 1991. It was followed by UN sanctions. And then, more than a decade later, the US invaded Iraq. All of this damaged the Iraqi currency, the dinar. It lost value with each conflict and finally collapsed when the Americans invaded some 20 years back. Just to give you an idea, $1 was worth 4,000 Iraqi dinars. So the war killed the Iraqi currency. After the war, the US established a stranglehold on the country, and the US dollar became the de facto currency of Iraq. America also helped establish the Central Bank of Iraq. But this is a cash-dependent economy. According to the World Bank, just 26% of Iraqi companies use the formal banking system, only 26%, about a quarter of them, and 98% of Iraq's companies pay their employees in cash. And since Iraqi dinar lacks value, the US dollar is used to make those payments. But the past few months have been turbulent. America has restricted Iraq's access to dollars. And why is that? To curb money laundering. Washington says dollars from Iraq are being funneled to Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. So the Americans limited the supply. This led to a cash crunch in Iraq. With fewer dollars to go around, the Iraqi dinar lost more value. Suddenly, people of Iraq had fewer dollars to use, so they jacked up the price. Officially, $1 was worth 1,460 Iraqi dinars, but on the street exchanges, it was selling for more than 1,700 Iraqi dinars, a single US dollar. You know what that means? When your currency is worth less, goods become more expensive, prices shoot up, inflation rises, and so does public anger. The same happened in Iraq. Citizens took to the streets. The government had to intervene. They decided to ditch the dollar and protect the dinar. Those still using the American currency will face tough punishments in Iraq, a fine of up to 1 million dinars. That's about $680. Repeat violations could lead you to jail. Businesses could lose their license. So Iraq's shift away from the dollar is out of necessity. It also shows how America controls the country 20 years after the invasion. It can cause economic havoc just by limiting the flow of dollars. Iraq's neighbors are watching all of this and exploring alternatives for themselves. In other words, they're all exploring de-dollarization. Last year, Saudi Arabia made an announcement. It would sell oil using different currencies like the euro and the Chinese yuan. Earlier this year, the UAE began talks with India to settle non-oil bills in Indian rupees. Since 2021, the UAE has been part of a pilot project too, a project run by the Swiss Bank for International Settlements. This is about making cross-border payments. It may allow nations to bypass the US dollar. Thailand and China are also part of this project. Long story short, every country worth its salt is looking for alternatives, and the writing is on the wall for the US dollar. It is losing ground. Meanwhile, the chip war is intensifying. It's the US versus China. Today, China fired a salvo, its first major strike really. China has banned an American company, a memory chip giant called Micron Technology. On what grounds? China says it poses a national security risk, so it has banned the chips from key infrastructure projects. And what is America's response? It says China's actions and accusations have no basis in fact, but observers see it for what it is. It's a tit-for-tat move from Beijing. Remember, Washington has been trying to curtail China's computer chip industry for a while now. The campaign is being led by US President Joe Biden. He's been urging allies to counter China's chip dominance, and now China has fired back. What does it mean for the company, for the chip industry, and for the world? Our next report explains.
The US-China chip war. It's one of the battlefields where the world's two biggest economies are trading blows. The fight is over advanced computer chips and the ability to make and use them. Over the past year, Washington has been on the attack. It blocked China's access to chip-making equipment and urged allies like Japan and South Korea to restrict chip sales. Overall, the US has been tightening the screws. But yesterday, China struck back. It announced a ban on US giant Micron Technology. Micron's products cannot be used for key infrastructure in China. And what constitutes key infrastructure? Whatever Beijing wants. China has loose definitions which help it exploit situations like this. But observers say that Micron chips will be banned in sectors ranging from telecoms to transport and finance. How is China justifying this ban? By saying that Micron failed its network security review and that Micron's products are a threat to China's national security.
I want to stress that the relevant review is to prevent cybersecurity issues of the product from endangering the security of key national information infrastructure. It is a necessary measure to protect national security.
The review was conducted by the Cyberspace Administration of China, or CAC. It says it has come to the conclusion that Micron products should be banned. On what grounds? Which products? The CAC hasn't given any details yet. Most observers think this move is more about politics than security. It was a shot fired at the US. Look at the timing. The announcement was made yesterday while the G7 summit was taking place in nearby Japan. It came when US President Joe Biden said the G7 nations had agreed to look at their relationships with China. The G7 nations want to counter what they call China's economic coercion. They want to de-risk and diversify their ties with Beijing. So it seems that China hit back with the Micron ban. Micron says it looks forward to continuing to engage in discussions with Chinese authorities. What choice does it have? Remember, China is a lucrative market. Last year, about 10% of Micron's $30 billion revenue came from mainland China. It's about 16% if you include Hong Kong. But there may be a silver lining. Micron produces chips that go into smartphones and computers. It has chips for infrastructure too, but that's a smaller part of Micron's business. Most of Micron's customers in China were also foreign firms, companies that manufactured their products in China. Technically, they haven't been barred from buying Micron products, so it isn't clear how much Micron will suffer due to China's ban. But despite the possibly weak impact, Beijing's move is still seen as an escalation, a return of fire in the chip war. The question is, how will the US respond to the latest salvo? We'll keep you updated.
Now let's talk about China. This year was supposed to be about their economic recovery. Instead, the Communist Party is dealing with a new problem, a new debt crisis. And the amount is staggering. $23 trillion. These are loans owed by the Chinese government. And a large chunk of this debt is accounted for, like what the Chinese government has borrowed by issuing bonds to the general public. This is accounted for, and this is not the problematic part. What's causing an alarm is the hidden debt in China. Now, what's hidden debt? These are loans taken by local governments. They're off the books. They're hidden, so it's hard to say how big these loans are. The estimates vary depending on who you ask, but no matter who you ask, they'll all tell you one thing: this is serious. Investment bank Goldman Sachs has one estimate. It says China's local governments owe $8.5 trillion. The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, has a different number. Their figure is $10 trillion. That's more than 40% of the initial estimate and over 80% of China's GDP. That's right. According to one estimate, China's GDP today stands at a little over $12 trillion, and the local government debt is at $10 trillion. These are the IMF's numbers. Whichever figure you choose to believe, it doesn't change a fundamental problem. Loans like these are unsustainable. They could push Chinese provinces towards bankruptcy. In fact, in some places, it's already happening. Hegang is a remote coal town in northeastern China. It is near China's border with Russia. Close to 1 million people live here. They're all suffering a financial crisis. According to one report, locals in Hegang do not have indoor heating. Taxi drivers are being slapped with more fines. Public school teachers fear job cuts. Street cleaners haven't got their salaries in 2 months. And these are all signs of financial distress. Reports say there's a cash crunch. And this story is not unique to this town of Hegang. It's playing out in the Guizhou region too. They're facing a debt crisis. Do you know how much money they owe? 2.6 trillion yuan. That's $380 billion, or 130% of Guizhou's GDP. How did this happen? How did a province borrow so much money without any checks and balances? Like I said, it was done off the books. In China, you have something called LGFVs. That's local government financing vehicles, LGFVs. And what are these? These are basically private companies. These are companies created by local officials just to borrow money. This is a way to bypass the official channels. And it serves two purposes. One, the debt doesn't show up on the official balance sheets. And two, there is no limit on how much money you can borrow. So these local governments keep raising more cash. And now that debt pile is crushing them. It's hard to say how many provinces are in distress, but reports mention some very frequently, like Guizhou, Henan, Heilongjiang, Hubei, and Guangdong. All these provinces are in debt distress. Either their provincial governments have loans to pay, or specific cities there are under strain. Either way, it's bad news for Xi Jinping. Bankrupt provinces is the last thing the Chinese president needs. Earlier this year, he asked officials to rein in debt. In fact, let me quote from a speech that was published in a Chinese journal. This is what he said: "It's necessary to consolidate the responsibility of provincial level governments to prevent and resolve hidden debts, increase efforts to dispose of outstanding hidden debts, optimize the maturity structure of debts, reduce the interest burden, steadily promote the unified supervision of local government hidden debt and on-the-books debt, and resolutely curb the increase of hidden debt." These are Xi Jinping's words. He wants to double income levels in China by 2035, but these hidden debts will come in the way. Any debt distress poses a risk for Xi Jinping because it will impact the middle class. It could widen the gap between the rich and the poor, and that in turn would threaten social stability and pose a challenge to the rule of the Communist Party. Can China control this crisis before it blows in its face? Well, knowing them, they'll first try to control the narrative and scrub off such reports. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with the Philippines, a massive fire broke out at the Manila Central Post Office. The structure was built in the year 1946. It's considered a national landmark. The fire has done some serious damage to the building. Meanwhile, one of Mexico's most active volcanoes is spewing ash and smoke. This affected flight operations in the region. And a SpaceX rocket ship is heading to the International Space Station. The team going to space includes a female astronaut from Saudi Arabia. She's the first Arab woman astronaut to go to the ISS. And finally, what makes the 22nd of May significant? We're taking you back in history to 1980. On this day, Pac-Man was released, a popular Japanese arcade game. It's been played for over 5 million hours worldwide. The game was created by game designer Toru Iwatani. Fun fact, he got the idea when he removed a slice from a pizza. We leave you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
liftoff, Falcon 9.
Together we expand what is possible in low Earth orbit. Ad Astra and Godspeed AX2.
Stage 1 throttle down.
Power telemetry nominal. 3 big sequences and a view.
Confirmed. Copy 2 Alpha.
The first stage is into the boost back burn, working its way back.
To help steer the booster down.
Landing leg deploy.
This is the first time that we have performed a land landing on a crew mission.
Thank you so much for all your support getting us here.
Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.